One night over dinner, Angela casually brought up a college reunion she'd been invited to. It seemed like just another social event at the time, nothing to worry about, but looking back, that moment marked the beginning of everything falling apart. Angela and I had been married for 7 years. On the surface, we had a pretty good life together. A comfortable home, stable jobs, and our golden retriever, Ralph, who was the heart of our little family. Angela was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went, confident and full of life, while I was more of the quiet, easygoing type. That dynamic worked for us, or so I thought. She brought energy and excitement into our lives, and I kept things grounded. But lately, something had shifted. Angela had been distant, distracted, and unusually secretive. She was spending more time on her phone, sometimes smiling at texts she wouldn't explain, and finding excuses to leave the house on her own. When I asked her about it, she always had an answer ready: work stress, catching up with friends, or just needing some space. I wanted to believe her, so I pushed my doubts aside, convincing myself that I was imagining things. When she brought up the reunion, she mentioned it like it was barely worth discussing. "So, there's this college reunion on Saturday," she said, casually twirling her fork in her salad. "A bunch of old friends are getting together at this restaurant downtown. I figured I'd go for a little bit." "Sounds fun," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Do you want me to come with you?" She immediately shook her head, laughing a little. "Nate, it's just my college friends. You wouldn't know anyone there, and honestly, you'd be bored out of your mind." I didn't like how quickly she dismissed the idea. "I wouldn't mind. I'd rather go with you than have you go alone," I said, testing her reaction. Her tone shifted slightly, sharper and more dismissive. "It's not a big deal. I'll just pop in, say hi to everyone, and come back. Seriously, there's no point in you going. It's just my crowd." Her reaction felt off. She was quick to shut down the idea, almost too quick, but I didn't push it. Angela had a way of making me feel like I was overthinking things, and I'd learned that questioning her too much usually led to an argument I couldn't win. Still, as the week went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that this no-big-deal reunion was a bigger deal than she was letting on. She spent hours shopping for a dress, eventually settling on a sleek red one that looked more suited for a date night than a casual meet-up with old friends. She also booked a nail appointment, got her hair done, and even spent extra time in front of the mirror trying out different makeup looks. On Friday evening, she showed me the dress she'd chosen. It was stunning, form-fitting, elegant, and just a little too sexy for the occasion. "Wow," I said, trying to sound casual. "You're really dressing up for this reunion, huh?" "It's just a nice dress," she replied, shrugging as if it wasn't a big deal. But I noticed she avoided making eye contact with me. By the time Saturday night rolled around, Angela looked like she was headed for a glamorous event. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and the red dress hugged her figure in a way that made her confidence practically radiate. "You look amazing," I told her as she grabbed her purse and slipped on a pair of high heels. "Thanks," she said with a quick smile. "Don't wait up, okay? I might be home late." I nodded, even though I knew I'd stay up. As she walked out the door, Ralph trotted over to me and wagged his tail, oblivious to the tension in the room. I scratched behind his ears, trying to shake the uneasy feeling building in my chest. I spent the evening trying to distract myself. I watched a movie, played fetch with Ralph, and even cleaned up the kitchen, but nothing could settle my nerves. I kept replaying our conversation in my head, wondering if I was reading too much into her behavior. The hours crawled by. By the time the movie ended, it was past midnight, and Angela still hadn't called or texted. That wasn't like her. She usually sent a quick message if she was going to be out late. I checked my phone a few times, but there was nothing. Ralph had curled up on the couch beside me, snoring softly, but I couldn't relax. Angela had been acting differently for weeks now. More distant, more guarded. She used to tell me everything, but lately it felt like there was a wall between us. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. As the minutes ticked by in silence, the knot in my stomach tightened. I tried to tell myself she was just caught up chatting with old friends, but the unease wouldn't go away. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house with Ralph snoring at my side, I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about my wife and our marriage was about to come crashing down. As soon as I got the call from Jack, I felt my whole world tilt. Jack wasn't just a guy I knew from around town. He worked security at the restaurant where Angela had gone to the reunion, and he had seen her behavior firsthand. He didn't sound like a man trying to be dramatic. His voice was calm, but there was a sense of urgency in it. I could hear the concern in his words as he described how Angela was acting. Jack wasn't the kind of person to stir up trouble. He told me that from the moment Angela had arrived, she and Scott had been unusually close, laughing together, touching each other in ways that didn't seem like just friends. I could hardly believe it, but there was no denying what Jack had said. He had worked security long enough to know when something felt off, and his instincts had clearly been right. I grabbed my keys and headed out of the house. Ralph, our dog, followed me to the door. I stopped for a moment, kneeling down to pet him. Ralph had no idea how much my life was about to change. His tail wagged in bliss, totally unaware of the storm brewing just a few miles away. The drive felt like it lasted forever. I couldn't stop thinking about the words Jack had said. "They're close, Nate. Too close." By the time I reached the restaurant, I was already a bundle of nerves. I parked a few blocks away, out of sight, so I wouldn't be noticed right away. Jack had mentioned that Angela and Scott were at a table near the back, and from what he'd told me, they'd been inseparable for most of the night. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something told me this wasn't the innocent reunion Angela had led me to believe. I stayed in my car for a few more minutes, watching the entrance. People came and went, laughing, chatting, completely unaware of the drama unfolding inside. I felt like an outsider, lurking in the shadows, trying to make sense of the situation. Then, I saw Jack. He emerged from the side of the building, casually glancing over his shoulder before walking toward me. I waved him over. He was dressed in a black security uniform, nothing too out of the ordinary, but his eyes were tense. He had clearly been watching things unfold for hours now. "Nate," he said, his voice low, "I'm telling you, there's something going on with Angela and Scott. They've been together the whole night, acting way too familiar with each other. The way they touch, the way they laugh, it's not how friends act." I didn't know what to say. Jack had always been the type to be straight with me, and I didn't doubt what he was saying. But hearing it out loud was like a slap in the face. "I've been watching them," Jack continued, glancing over his shoulder again. "They kissed, Nate, outside on the terrace. I'm not making this up. I didn't want to call you too soon, but it's getting obvious. You need to come inside and see for yourself." I felt my stomach drop. He had just confirmed what I had feared, but couldn't bring myself to acknowledge. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Thanks, Jack. I'm going inside." I gave him a quick nod before heading into the restaurant. It was bustling with people, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. But all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I couldn't just stand outside anymore. I needed to see it. I needed to see them together. I didn't immediately spot Angela and Scott, so I grabbed a seat near the bar, making sure I had a clear view of the whole room. The tension in my chest was unbearable. I watched as people danced, mingled, and drank, but my eyes kept scanning the room for them. I couldn't focus on anything else. Then, finally, I saw her, Angela, and Scott. They entered the main room together, laughing as they walked in. Their smiles were wide, like they'd been sharing a private joke, and I couldn't miss how they stood a little too close, how Scott's hand casually brushed the small of Angela's back as they walked. It wasn't normal. It wasn't just friends being friendly. It was too intimate. My stomach churned, but I stayed where I was. I wasn't going to make a scene just yet. I needed more proof. Jack had sent me a quick text saying they were headed to the terrace. I pushed myself off the bar stool and moved toward the back of the restaurant, staying far enough behind them so they wouldn't see me. The cold air hit me when I stepped onto the terrace, but I didn't feel it. I was focused on Angela and Scott. They were standing outside, talking and laughing, but it didn't look like a friendly conversation anymore. It was something else, something that had been building all night. The way they leaned in toward each other, the way their eyes locked, it was unmistakable. And then it happened. Scott leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a quick peck. It was slow and deep, and Angela didn't pull away. She kissed him back like she'd been waiting for that moment. I could feel my world shift, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. It felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. They pulled away, and for a moment, Angela smiled, genuinely, like she was enjoying herself. But then she glanced around, as if she was making sure no one had seen. That's when I knew. I wasn't just being paranoid. They were hiding it from me, and they weren't done. They talked for a bit longer, and then Scott placed his hand on the small of Angela's back again, leading her away from the terrace. I stood there in the shadows, unable to move, too shocked to do anything but watch. Before they left, Jack texted me again. They're leaving, Nate. Heading to the parking lot. You need to see this. I didn't wait for them to get too far. I stepped back into the restaurant and walked out the front door, making my way to the parking lot, where I could just see them walking toward a car. Angela had her arm linked with Scott's, her body language far too familiar, far too intimate. It was clear now. They were together. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I couldn't even move. All I could do was watch as my wife walked away with another man, her face glowing in a way I hadn't seen in months. The betrayal was undeniable. I pulled out my phone and quickly texted Jack back, my hands shaking. Thanks for letting me know. He responded almost instantly. Sorry, man. I hated seeing it, but you needed to know. I stood there, watching them disappear into the parking lot, before I turned and walked back to my car. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. What was I supposed to do now? One thing was clear. Angela had crossed the line, and I wasn't going to let this go. I didn't sleep that night. The weight of everything I'd seen kept me wide awake, replaying the images of Angela and Scott in my mind. The kiss, the way she smiled, the way she'd let him touch her like that, like I didn't exist. I didn't even know what to do with myself. I just kept pacing around the house, the silence so thick it almost suffocated me. Ralph, sensing my mood, stayed close by, his head resting on my feet, as if he was trying to comfort me in a way I couldn't understand. But nothing could comfort me, not after what I had witnessed. I didn't call Angela that night. I couldn't. What was there to say? She'd made her choice. She'd been with Scott all evening, laughing and touching and kissing like I wasn't even a part of her life anymore. The betrayal was real, and there was no denying it. The next morning, everything felt off. I tried to go through the motions of my day, feeding Ralph, grabbing a coffee, doing the usual things, but I couldn't focus. Every time I thought of Angela, I felt this tight knot in my chest. She hadn't come home until late, and when she did, she pretended like everything was fine. She didn't even look guilty. She just acted like nothing had happened, like nothing had changed. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. I waited until evening, knowing she'd eventually ask about the night before. I needed to hear her side of the story, but I wasn't ready to let her manipulate me anymore. I'd been too trusting, too blind to the signs. Now I was determined to get the truth out of her, whether she liked it or not. When she came into the living room, I was sitting on the couch, trying to act like everything was normal. But I couldn't mask the tension in my body, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Hey, Nate, she said, her voice light, almost too casual. How was your day? I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, trying to figure out how to approach this. I knew she was about to lie to me again, and I wasn't in the mood to play her game anymore. You really think I didn't see what happened last night? I said, my voice low but steady. You and Scott, you're not fooling anyone. Her face immediately went blank. Her eyes widened for just a split second before she masked it with a fake smile. What are you talking about? I stood up, unable to stay sitting. You and him. I saw you two at the restaurant last night. Angela. I saw you kiss him. I saw you act like I didn't even exist. Her face turned pale, and for a second, I could see the cracks in her perfect facade. But then, just as quickly, the defensiveness kicked in. Nate, I don't know what you're talking about. You're blowing this out of proportion. She laughed nervously, stepping back like she was trying to distance herself from the conversation. I didn't let her off the hook. Don't lie to me, Angela. I watched the whole thing. Jack saw it too. You and Scott were all over each other. And now you're pretending like nothing happened? I'm not stupid. Her eyes flickered with panic, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. But then, just as quickly, her anger flared up. You're not stupid. You're paranoid. You're making things up. Scott and I are just friends, okay? Just friends. You've got no right to accuse me of anything. I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. Friends don't kiss each other like that. Angela, don't pretend I'm the crazy one here. I'm not the one who's been hiding things. She was breathing heavily now, her face flushed with frustration and anger. You're so ridiculous, Nate. You don't know anything. Scott and I are just friends, and that's it. You're the one who's been pushing me away. Maybe if you hadn't been so focused on everything else, maybe I wouldn't have felt so alone. I could feel my blood boil. The lies, the manipulation, it was all too much. Don't turn this around on me, Angela. This is about you and Scott. Don't pretend like I'm the problem here. You've been hiding this from me for how long? Her voice cracked as she tried to hold back tears. It's not like that, Nate. You just don't understand. I laughed bitterly. No, I get it. I get it more than you think. You've been lying to me for months, and you thought you could get away with it. Well, I'm done. I turned to walk out of the room, but she followed me, her voice becoming more desperate. Nate, please don't do this. You don't know what you're saying. I'm sorry, I messed up, but we can fix this. We can. I stopped and turned around, my face cold. No, we're done. I'm filing for divorce, Angela. This is over. Her face twisted in disbelief. You're really going to do this? You're really going to leave me over this? You think I just cheated on you? You're insane, Nate. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I had caught her red-handed, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. As I walked to the door, she screamed after me, her voice breaking. I hate you. You'll regret this. But I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. The anger, the heartbreak. It was all still there, but I knew I had done the right thing. I had finally stood up for myself. I spent the night at a friend's house, not knowing exactly what my next steps were, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back to her. I spent the next few days in a daze. I didn't go back to the house. I stayed with friends, kept to myself, and let the reality of what had happened sink in. At first, there was a part of me that wanted to call Angela, maybe work things out, but then I'd remember what I saw, how she kissed Scott, how she pretended like nothing was wrong. I wasn't an idiot, and I wasn't going to let her twist things around anymore. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. And she had made it. I didn't hear from her for the first 24 hours. It was almost like she had given up, like she realized that she had gone too far and couldn't come back from it. But then she started calling and texting, and I couldn't avoid it forever. The first call came late in the evening. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Her voice sounded shaky, almost pleading. Nate, please. I know I messed up, but this isn't how I want things to end. We can fix this, I swear. Just call me back. Please. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What was there to say? She had betrayed me, and now she was acting like the victim. The nerve of it. The next morning, I got another text. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go this far. Please come home. We can talk. I almost laughed. Talk? What was there to talk about? She had already made her decision. She had already crossed that line. No amount of talking would fix what had been broken. I deleted the message without responding. The next day, things got worse. I came back to my apartment to find a letter shoved under the door. I opened it to find a legal document, a divorce petition. Angela was officially moving forward with the divorce, and she was requesting custody of Ralph. My stomach twisted as I read through the document, each line a reminder of everything she had taken from me. I didn't care about the divorce at this point. I was beyond caring about that. But the mention of Ralph hit me hard. I wasn't sure what had hurt more, the betrayal, or the thought of losing the dog we had raised together. Ralph had been my companion through thick and thin. He was more than just a dog, he was family. I didn't waste any time. I called my lawyer. Listen, I need to move fast. Angela's already filed for divorce, and I'm not letting her take Ralph, I said, my voice tight. I want full custody of him. I don't care what it takes. My lawyer assured me that we'd fight for it, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. There were no guarantees, and I didn't have time to waste. That night, I finally decided to face Angela. She'd been sending texts all day, each one more desperate than the last. But I wasn't sure what I was hoping to achieve by going back to that house. Maybe closure. Maybe just to hear her admit what she had done. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going back to her. I was just getting ready to close that chapter once and for all. I drove back to the house, my hands gripped tightly on the wheel. It was a strange feeling, returning to a place that no longer felt like home. It felt cold, foreign, even though I had lived there for years. When I walked in, she was sitting at the kitchen table. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked defeated. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at me, almost like she was waiting for me to make the first move. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I stood in the doorway, just watching her. I felt nothing anymore, just anger and a sense of loss. I don't want you to take Ralph, I said flatly. I don't care what you think you're entitled to. I'm not letting you take him from me. She didn't look surprised. Instead, she wiped her eyes and gave a short, bitter laugh. You think you're the only one who's lost something? You're not the only one who's hurting, Nate. I messed up, but I don't deserve to be treated like this. You think this is easy for me? I didn't want things to end like this either. I stepped further into the room, my voice steady, but with a hint of finality. You didn't want things to end like this? You had a choice. You didn't care enough to make the right one. You chose Scott. And now, I'm choosing to leave. I'm choosing to move on. Her face twisted with anger and frustration. You don't get it, do you? I was lonely. You were distant. I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood me. And Scott, he's been there for me, Nate. He cares about me in ways you never did. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But I knew this was just her trying to manipulate me. The same old excuses. You're right, I said, taking a step back. I wasn't there for you. But I was never the one kissing other people behind your back. Her face turned red. You're not listening to me. You don't get how hard this is. You're making me out to be the villain, but I'm not. No, Angela, I said, my voice cold. You are. You're the villain in your own story, and I'm not sticking around for the rest of it. With that, I turned and left the house. I couldn't stand to be in that place another minute. I wasn't going to let her drag me down any longer. I could hear her shouting from the door as I walked to my car. But I didn't turn back. I knew what I had to do. The divorce was coming, and I wasn't going to fight her for what was left of our marriage. I was going to fight for the things that really mattered, things like Ralph and my own peace of mind. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was done. I was done with her lies, done with her manipulations, done with being her backup plan. It was time for me to move on. The days that followed were filled with paperwork, meetings with my lawyer, and awkward interactions with Angela. She had tried calling me a couple of times, but I had nothing left to say. Her apologies felt empty, her explanations hollow. I didn't care anymore about the reasons she gave me for her betrayal. I wasn't looking for closure from her. I was looking for something I hadn't had in a long time, peace. I spent my time focusing on getting my life back in order. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, especially with the divorce process underway, but I had to do it. I had to stop letting Angela's actions dictate my emotions. Ralph, of course, was a major part of my focus. The court battles were tense. Angela fought for custody, just like I knew she would. And though I didn't want to drag things out, I couldn't let her take him from me. We'd been through too much together, and I wasn't going to lose him over something as petty as her selfishness. I won full custody of Ralph in the end. The judge ruled in my favor, citing Angela's infidelity and emotional neglect as factors in the decision. It felt like a small victory, but it was one I needed. Ralph had been there for me through every painful moment, and I wasn't going to let him be part of her fallout. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I started running again, something I hadn't done since before all of this started. Ralph came with me, of course, trotting along beside me like he'd always done. His companionship was the one constant thing in my life that felt right. I also spent time with friends who'd been supportive, helping me laugh and remember what it felt like to have a life outside of the mess Angela had caused. A few of them had met her at one point or another, and I could see how uncomfortable it made them to talk about her now. I never forced them to choose sides, but it was clear where their loyalties lay. Angela had burned so many bridges with her actions, and I wasn't surprised by how quickly she lost the respect of those who had once supported her. There were a few moments where I felt the old pull, the desire to text Angela, to see if she was okay, to get some kind of answer to the questions I'd never asked. But I quickly shut those thoughts down. I didn't need to hear from her anymore. I didn't need her closure. What I needed was to heal and move forward with my life, without her toxic presence in it. I also had moments of doubt. I had loved her, and even though I knew the truth now, the pain of being betrayed didn't go away overnight. But I learned to let go. I learned to trust myself again. And most importantly, I learned that I deserved better than the life I had lived with her. One night, a few months after everything had settled down, I sat on the porch with Ralph, watching the sun set. Life was slowly moving forward, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. I heard my phone buzz in my pocket, but I didn't rush to check it. It was probably Angela again, trying to get me to talk to her. But I'd long since stopped caring about what she wanted. I had my life to rebuild, and that was what I was focused on now. The message was from a number I didn't recognize. It was short, just a few words, but they hit me like a punch to the gut. I miss you. I want to fix this. It was Angela. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing left to fix. The woman I thought I knew had betrayed me, and there was no going back. Instead, I put the phone down, took a deep breath, and looked over at Ralph, who was lying contentedly by my side. I scratched his ears and smiled. I wasn't going back to the past. I was moving forward, and that was enough.